So, how do you build a society from, well, basically nothing? How do you walk into a raw, untamed piece of the American frontier and carve out a community with its own customs, its own faith, its own rules? Well, we're going to dive into that very question using the incredible history of one place, Ashley County, Arkansas, as our guide.
Just try to picture arriving in a place like this. The very first settlers walked into a world of almost unbelievable abundance. I mean, this wasn't some quiet, peaceful forest. The land was absolutely teeming with life, so much so that you could supposedly kill a sack full of squirrels with just a stick. It's a level of raw, natural energy that's almost impossible for us to imagine today. And you know what's really fascinating here is the two sides of that coin. On one hand, you've got this incredible gift, huge cane brakes, thick forests, wild fruit hanging everywhere. But on the other hand, that same abundance was a constant threat. The very animals that could feed your family, the coons, the squirrels, the bears, could also sneak in and wipe out your entire year's worth of crops. This was a land of huge opportunity, but also of constant daily challenges.
Okay, so how on earth did they manage to survive, let alone build anything? Well, this first part shows us how they went from just surviving to actually taming the land. And really, it all boiled down to one thing: relentless, back-breaking labor. Every single thing, from their food on the table to the roof over their heads, had to be built with their own two hands.
Let's just take a fence, for example. Sounds simple, right? Well, not even close. Building what they called a worm fence was this massive, multi-step ordeal. You had to pick the absolute best trees, heart pine or white oak, so they wouldn't rot. Chop them down, cut them into 10-foot logs, and then split every single rail by hand before you could even start stacking them 10 rails high. This fence was the physical line between a successful harvest and a winter of starvation.
And I love this because it really gets to the human side of things. This work wasn't just about survival. It was a huge source of pride. Being able to build a straight, solid fence was a mark of your skill and your character. It meant you were a good provider, a capable person. And yeah, you'd literally invite your neighbors over on a Sunday afternoon just so they could admire your work. It was a status symbol built with sweat.
And all that hard work, it absolutely paid off. Just think about all those dense forests and that untamed wilderness. By the year 1850, those pioneers had managed to clear and farm over 15,000 acres. 15,000! That number is just staggering. It represents a total transformation of the landscape, done one farm and one fence at a time.
But of course, growing the food was really only half the battle. Then you had to figure out how to make it last. With no refrigeration, they became masters of preservation. They used techniques like jerking, which is basically what we'd call making jerky, drying meat over a slow fire. They'd sun-dry fruit, pack cabbage with salt to make kraut, and carefully bury sweet potatoes to last the winter. These weren't hobbies, these were life-or-death skills.
But you need more than just food and fences to make a society. So the next big question is, how did all these isolated families start weaving themselves together into a real community? Let's take a look at the customs and the faith that acted as the glue holding them all together.
So forget about a quiet, romantic wedding night. A really popular tradition back then was something called the charivari. After a couple got married, the whole community would show up at their house for an all-night party of, well, noise. They'd bang on pots and pans, sing songs, and even drag a string across the window pane to make this horrible screeching sound. It sounds absolutely wild to us, but it was a way for the whole community to celebrate and give their blessing to the new marriage.
But here's where it gets really interesting: the lines they drew. Their social lives were ruled by some very strict religious codes. A party game that involved a semi-dancing circular march? Totally fine. Good, clean fun. But if you dared to dance a proper waltz or a two-step, whoa. That was considered a sin so serious you could actually be excommunicated, literally kicked out of the church.
And that tells you just how central the church was to everything. This chart from 1850 really drives it home. Just between the Methodists and the Baptists, you're looking at 1,500 official members in what was still a pretty new county. I mean, these weren't just buildings for Sunday service. They were the absolute center of social, moral, and even a kind of local government for these pioneers.
So you've got this community taking shape with these really strong, deep-seated values. But it was about to be tested like never before. The middle of the 19th century brought a firestorm of change that would challenge everything they'd built, from the Civil War all the way through the chaotic years of Reconstruction.
Now, before we go any further, it's really important we're clear about the lens we're looking through here. The source material for this history was written in the 20th century, from a distinctly pro-Southern point of view.
So what you're about to see is a direct reflection of that specific perspective, especially when it comes to slavery and the Civil War.
And this quote right here, it's a perfect window into that mindset. The author makes the claim that the enslaved people in Ashley County were just as loyal to the Confederacy as the soldiers themselves. This is a core part of what historians call the lost cause narrative, an interpretation of the Civil War that tried to reframe the Confederate cause. In the source material, this idea is just presented as a simple fact.
So after the war, you get Reconstruction. And this timeline, wow. It just lays out a decade of complete and violent chaos. You've got the federal government imposing military rule. A year later, the local elected officials are just thrown out of office. At the same time, you have groups like the Ku Klux Klan parading openly in the town square, and federal agents, like the one from the Freedmen's Bureau, being shot and run out of town. This wasn't just instability, it was a flat-out, brutal power struggle over the future of the South.
And again, here's how the source material interprets these events. It frames Reconstruction not as an effort to rebuild the country or integrate newly freed people, but as a vengeful campaign driven by the North's hate of Southern whites. This viewpoint casts the rise of groups like the KKK not as an act of aggression, but as a kind of defensive, underground reaction to what they saw as federal repression.
All right, so as the county finally starts to pull out of this period and heads towards the 20th century, a whole different kind of transformation gets underway. The old pioneer world of self-sufficiency is really starting to fade, replaced by a new society driven by commerce, industry, and technology.
I mean, check this out. It's a snapshot of life in 1900 from a local store's ad. A men's winter shirt for 15 cents. A set of heavy underwear, also 15 cents. A boy's wool hat was just a dime. This tells you we're in a totally different world now. It's becoming a world based on cash and commerce, not just on what you can grow or make yourself.
And just to put that in perspective for you, if you go back just 50 years to 1849, a basic pair of work shoes cost 50 cents. So now in 1900, you could buy a shirt, underwear, a hat, and a bottle of snuff, all for less than what one pair of shoes cost a generation before.
So what was the big game changer? What drove all of this? In a word, the railroad. Its arrival after the Civil War was the single biggest catalyst for change. All of a sudden, those endless forests of pine and oak weren't just obstacles to be cleared for a farm anymore. They were a product. The railroad created an almost unlimited market for timber, and sawmills started popping up all over the place, completely flipping the county's economy on its head.
And with that new economy came all the stuff we think of as modern. You see the first movie being shown at the Opera House. Screen doors, something we totally take for granted, are being advertised for the very first time. You could buy a graphophone to listen to recorded music. And then, of course, the automobile arrives. By 1920, there were 600 cars registered in the county. The world was shrinking, and it was changing fast.
It is just an incredible arc when you step back and look at it. In just a few generations, this place goes from being a raw wilderness where survival was a daily fight to a modernizing American community with an industrial economy, new technologies, and all the complexities that come with a settled society.
The story of Ashley County shows us that it takes a lot more than just hard work. It takes shared rituals, a powerful faith, and the resilience to get through unbelievable conflict and change. And it kind of leaves us with a question to think about. In our own time, in a world of digital frontiers and virtual communities, what are the fences we're building? And what's the faith that's holding us all together?